Hey everyone, I just wanted to talk about the Industrial Revolution today. Happy Tuesday. I hope everyone's having a great Tuesday. So today we're actually going to get into the Industrial Revolution. Yesterday we learned about what led up to it, so the Agricultural Revolution. But today we're actually going to get into the actual Industrial Revolution. And then tomorrow we will really look at the impacts that this really had on the rest of the world. So we'll really get to see a lot of those impacts already today, but this is more explaining how the Industrial Revolution went and some of the major outcomes of the Industrial Revolution. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first industry that's going to get hit by this is going to be the textile industry. So the textile industry was in huge demand. So the more people there were on the earth, the more clothes they actually needed. Clothes are culturally acceptable, so you need clothes to live in society. So the first major industry that really got hit because clothes production was so slow. We talked about this a little yesterday, but we'll reemphasize it. In the medieval period, so 1500s, 1700s, they were still using urine to make textiles. So they were still using that as a curing process. So the first major industry that needed transformation and that needed a boom was the textile industry. So as a result, the textile industry became the first industrialized industry that we are going to look at. So this is going to lead to some huge impacts throughout the world, a lot more impacts than you would necessarily think from the clothing industry, but it's really going to be the first industry that has a huge boom. So the first things that are going to allow the industry to boom are going to be inventions throughout the textile industry. So we have things like the sewing machine, you have new techniques in weaving, you have new tools that actually allow textiles to be made quickly. So on top of that, you are going to have a huge boom in the cotton industry. Obviously, if you're going to have a huge boom in the textile industry, you need natural resources to actually make it possible to produce enough clothing for this population boom that's happening. Remember, even just in Russia, in 100 years, they went up 12, 13 million people. So that is a lot of people who needed clothes. The problem with this need for more production of cotton is going to be that the slavery in southern United States is going to boom. So there's going to be a huge amount of slavery that's going to start taking place. So I'm sure you guys have heard of the stereotypical American slave picking cotton. And this is really where that got its origins from, is because the first large boom of the Industrial Revolution is going to be cotton. And because of this, most of the plantations in the South are going to start producing cotton. Between cotton and tobacco, there is a huge, huge, huge amount of slaves that are having to work here in the United States on producing cotton and in the fields. So I'm sure you've all heard of Eli Whitney's cotton gin. So everyone hears about it when they're in like 8th grade as like one of the biggest inventions to ever come. And this is actually why it's considered one of the bigger inventions to ever happen in the world, is actually because it took the production of cotton and it lessened the time exponentially. So let's go ahead and look at a depiction of the cotton gin, and I think that's going to explain a lot about why this was such a revolutionary invention. So before the cotton gin, you can see the seeds inside these cotton balls. So you would actually get a cotton ball, and it would have a bunch of different seeds inside this cotton ball. And each of those seeds had to be individually picked out of the cotton balls. So the cotton gin actually allowed this cotton to be placed into a machine and for clean cotton to come out the other side using like a tearing and sifting method, and actually the seeds would be collected inside the machine. So if we go back to this side, and you can actually see the picture over here, it was a large amount of cotton being put into these machines. Someone would crank the machine, and then it would come out as clean cotton on the other side. As you could imagine, that saved a huge amount of time. Could you imagine having to individually pick out each one of these seeds before this machine was invented? So this really allowed for this to be the first boom out of the Industrial Revolution. So this cotton gin really was one of the greatest inventions, especially when it came to mass production of clothing. The cotton gin allowed for those seeds to come out. I'm not saying this is the biggest invention of the Industrial Revolution, because we'll look at that in a second. But I think this was one of the biggest inventions we're going to see come out of this Industrial Revolution, just because it allowed for that huge mass production of clothing. This also is going to lead to a factory system. So we saw this picture a little earlier, but as you notice, this is a factory for one thing. This factory is literally just for spinning clothes. So these were large, super large factories that just had one specific thing. This is really going to be the first real glimpse of capitalism that we are going to see. So it's really going to be not producing to have your family be fed, or not producing to have one or two of the item that you can sell. It's producing to have this very super fast, super cheap method of mass producing things inside one factory. It's going to lead to huge profits for these owners, because at this point in time, remember, everything's being handmade. So say it takes me $10 to make a shirt, hand stitch everything. You make one shirt, you're like, I got a dope shirt, I need to sell this for $15. If you're making it in a factory for $1 because you're mass producing it and you're getting all of these raw materials super cheap, then you can charge $10, you're undercutting the other person's price, and you're making a profit of $9. So it is this huge profit-making machine. I'm sure you guys are very familiar with the factory system because we still use it here in the United States, and it has really revolutionized the world. There's not much nowadays that doesn't get made in a factory. So this is going to help mass produce clothes at this point in time, and then throughout the rest of the world, it's going to mass produce everything else that you can think of. Typically, these factories were located near rivers, though. So they weren't necessarily getting electricity at this point in time, but they were able to spin a wheel, which would allow for machines to work, because you could use a cog system, and you could actually allow those machines to work just using hydro power. So you would put a water wheel inside the river, and the water wheel would allow for these machines to work and for these factories to produce things without having a huge amount of manpower. That is all until 1765, when James Watt made the first steam engine. So the steam engine, I would say, is one of the biggest inventions ever known to man. The steam engine allowed for industrialization of the entire world. From even the mining of coal to the mining of iron, steam engines were used for those. But not only that, but for transportation. You've got literally everything that you can think of that started off running on a steam engine. So steam engines allowed for these factories to be built in cities. So people didn't have to commute or even live near a river to have these large factories inside their towns. So now we're not only having towns that can have these large factories that are near rivers, but we have towns literally anywhere in the world that can have these factories, even in like deserts, you could have a factory because of the steam engine, which was a revolutionary idea. So here's just an estimate. I know you guys can't see all of these because I can't either because my face is in the way. But let's just look at a few of these times here. So a journey in 1836 before the steam engine, before the train steam engine, would take 43 hours to get from London to Edinburgh. With the invention of the train and with the industrialization of Europe, it would take 12 and a quarter hours. So to get from London to Liverpool, 24 hours. So a whole day to get to Liverpool, and only 6.5 hours by train now, after the industrialization of Europe. So huge impacts all throughout Europe. The next thing is going to be iron. So with the invention of the steam engine and these huge factories and with bridges and railroads, iron was one of the most sought after commodities right when the Industrial Revolution starts, because to make these large factories, they're actually going to revolutionize a way to make steel super cheap. So what's going to happen is they are going to need the raw material to make iron. And by the 1800s, England had really, really perfected the art of mining iron, and they had a huge amount of natural resources in England. So let's go ahead and look at this graph here. So England had more natural resources than the rest for iron than the rest of the world combined. So that is all of the world combined. They had more iron natural resources. So you can see how many tons per year they were actually mining out of England. And that is a huge deficit or deficiency influx compared to the rest of the world. So no one even gets close to how much iron England is contributing. So we can really see England as one of the biggest producers and the biggest players in this industrial revolution. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the rest of Europe and America, because we've really been focusing mostly on England, but we need to take a real quick look at what's going to really influence the rest of world history. So Germany was one of the biggest countries to embrace the Industrial Revolution. This is really super important because the first countries to embrace this Industrial Revolution became powerhouses in the world. So you were taking all of these natural resources, making all of these factories, and being able to sustain your economy so well that Germany ends up building one of the most powerful modern militaries in the world, especially because factories, you were able to mass produce guns, you were able to mass produce later on cars, you were able to mass produce everything out of these factories that you would need to have a powerful modern military. They also are going to become one of the industrial leaders for the world. We don't think of Germany as an industrial leader anymore, but Germany actually produces a lot of the stuff that we use. They produce the technology that we use quite a bit. A lot of our iPhone here is actually produced out of Germany, which is a really interesting thing. The other one that's going to be important is the United States. So the United States are going to be one of the most powerful nations that come out of this industrial revolution. We had so many natural resources here, and we had the amount of slaves that we really did have helped make our industrialization of America very streamlined. So we had the South that was actually having these plantations and getting those natural resources, and they would ship those goods to the North where all of the industrialization was happening. So after the Civil War, the United States became an actual world leader in railroads, oil, steel, electricity. I mean, everything you can think of that you would need to grow an empire, which are all of those things, you had here in the United States and allowed us to become the superpower that we actually are, which is a really neat But this is really going to lead to is monopolies. So we never really thought about this concept when we were founding the United States, but the concept of actually having monopolies on the market and just becoming almost more powerful than the government, some of these people actually ended up doing, because they had literally all of the supply chains for whatever good they were making, and they were buying them. And it was making these people who had enough wealth to buy anything that they actually wanted and actually put the price of the goods to whatever they wanted because they controlled the whole supply chain. So we'll talk a lot more about monopolies later, but that's really what this is going to lead to here in the United States. So in final conclusion, let's go ahead and look at what we've really talked about and what big ideas we can kind of take out of this. So 17 to 1900, we had this huge revolution in agriculture. We had it in transportation, communication, every industry you could think of here in the United States and in Western Europe. We are going to industrialize it. We are going to put it in these big factories, and we are going to change the face of the earth forever. In a good way and in a bad way, I can't imagine one being without the other, because industrialization did lead to us kind of destroying a lot of our natural resources around the world. And our earth is really paying the price for industrialization at this point. We've also encouraged people to have these massive militaries, and the fight for natural resources really has been a terrible thing, especially the fight for oil in the Middle East. Not a great thing, but industrialization, on the other hand, has allowed people to have lifestyles that are comfortable and to live these lifestyles that are so much better than you could imagine before the industrialization of the United States. Again, the economic power that a lot of these economies are now going to have is also going to be a benefit, but then the military power that they're also going to have because of this industrialization going to be a downside to it. If you guys know anything about history, Germany really had a say in what was going on because of their mass industrialization and their large modern military. So the last thing we're going to talk about is the negative effects of industrialization, not only on the world, but on the actual people of the world. So working conditions were super, super bad during this period of time. We had child labor, which was super rampant. People were dying inside these factories. Children were dying inside these factories. They were working 15, 16-hour days. Slaves were being worked to death too, to try to meet the demands of industrialization. So tomorrow we're going to learn about a few more impacts on the world that industrialization had, and then we're going to get into how the fight for natural resources really led to a lot of conflict in the world. So that'll be on actually Thursday. Today you don't have any questions that went with this, so thanks for bearing with me. If you got to the end of this, you know we don't have any questions, so that's awesome. And look for some questions on Thursday. Tomorrow we are going to have a worksheet that I'll have you guys fill out. It's pretty simple. It'll be online. So be looking for that, and I hope you all have a great Tuesday. Have a good one.